Yo, what is going on, SOFI investors? Jay here. I have 699 subscribers. If you could be that lucky number 700, I would really appreciate it. In today's video, I want to talk about who actually owns SOFI. How much does retail own? How much do institutions own? And then what institutions own SOFI stock and which ones are buying and selling shares? If you take a look at the chart here, SOFI Technologies, we are down around 3% from the beginning of the week. Not too bad considering we had that horrible sell-off after earnings. We've definitely stabilized. We bottomed around $6.60. There seems to be a lot of resistance in that $6.50 range. So if you're into selling cash secured puts, in that $6 and $7 range seems like a pretty happy home to me. Let's break down the ownership of SOFI. Right now, the general public, retail, owns 54% of the shares, about 570 million shares. And then institutions own 420 million, public companies own 45 million, and individual insiders own about 18 million, around 2%. In order for SOFI's share price to stabilize, what we're going to need to do is see the general public retail ownership and institutional ownership flip. I would love to see institutional ownership around 54% and retail under 40%. That is the goal long term. I want to show you guys what institutions own SOFI stock, how many shares they actually own, and if they're buying or selling their shares. So the top 5 holders of SOFI are Vanguard Group, SoftBank, BlackRock, Silver Lake Technology, and Qatar Investment Authority. So BlackRock trimmed their position marginally, not even 1%. So that doesn't matter at all. But Vanguard, who is a very huge institutional owner, is adding more shares. In this recent quarter, they added 6.62% to their already substantial holdings of SOFI. They're currently holding about 81.5 million shares of SOFI, 7.71%. The next biggest owner, SoftBank, owns 45 million, BlackRock owns 40 million, and then the next group of ownership, ARK Invest now owns 1.5% of all the shares. They increased their holdings by 723% over the last quarter. She did a lot of buying of SOFI in the last quarter. Next is State Street Global and Geode Capital Management, Two Sigma Investments, and Two Sigma Advisors. Two Sigma had trimmed their positions in the last quarter, 18% in one holdings and 3.5% in the other. But State Street Global and Geode Capital each increased their stake 8% and almost 5% respectively. And as we go down, we see a lot more green than red, which is great. Nikko Asset Management increased their holdings by 176%, and Morgan Stanley, one of the biggest institutional investors in the world, increased their stake in SOFI by 26%, which is really good. And Anthony Noto currently owns about 0.76% of SOFI. He has 8 million shares of SOFI. Currently, he increased his stake 5%. And then Norges Bank Investments cut their investment by 26%. Millennium Management went huge, adding 645%. Now they have almost 5.5 million shares. Goldman Sachs, another big time American bank, just increased their stake by 10%. And then Citadel, another really big firm, increased their holdings by 632%. Northern Trust up almost 4%. Everything else pretty much flat. JP Morgan added some shares too, around 5.5% increase, almost 3 million shares for JP Morgan Chase. So a lot of these big companies like Vanguard, Morgan Stanley, ARK Invest, Charles Schwab, Chase, they're starting to add positions to SOFI, which is great for us, right? The more institutions that own SOFI, the better for the share price stability, and better because these institutions aren't into swinging from $7 to $10. They're in for the long term. They want to take SoFi from $7 to $20 to $25 to $30. That's where they make big time money. At least a double up. I don't see any of these big companies trimming their holdings for at least a $15 to $20 price of SoFi, which again is awesome for us long-term SoFi investors. I think that a lot of these big banks are going to start adding to their positions. Like I said, there's a lot more green than red, and most of the red is from smaller firms. And a lot of these big banks like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they're just starting to grow their position, right? So if they're opening up positions, that means they could potentially add more shares as time goes on. We want to see more institutions buying up SoFi shares over the next year. We want to see this number right here, 39.8%, go to 45 or 50% by the end of the year. If we can do that, I think SoFi can get to around $10 to $12 by the end of 2024. Obviously, depending on what Powell does with interest rates. If he cuts rates, SoFi is going to go up a lot faster than it would if they hold steady or potentially increase rates. Powell said he doesn't see increases coming, but they could stay higher for longer, which I think is definitely going to be the case. In my opinion, we get 1, maybe 2 rate decreases by the end of the year. It's not going to be anything substantial, so take that into consideration when you're buying or holding SoFi stock. Remember, I do own SoFi shares. I own about 4,000 shares. I'm always going to give you guys my honest feedback, my honest opinion about the business, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right now, we're having trouble going into earnings because a lot of people are like, these swing traders are like, oh, it's going to go up and sell off, so I'm going to ride the wave up and then I'm going to dump. But it didn't pump. People were smart and they didn't buy the news this time. So they were smarter. So there wasn't that big rip and then the dip. We just kind of dipped. And actually, in the long term, I think that's better because people aren't going to play earnings as hard as they had in the past because that big rip wasn't there in Q1. So that's something to think about going forward as well. Please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We really appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you so much. Peace.